we do it in English today, this morning, most likely. Yes. So it's really my pleasure to restart the scientific seminars of ANITI for this summer session. And it's our great pleasure to welcome our two international chairs from the US. And the talks will be quite related. One is on vision and the other one on robotics, but involving also some world models. So the first speaker is Thomas Serre. So I think everybody knows Thomas, international chair already in the first version of ANITI. Great researchers, many numeric papers uh, on uh, robotics, no, vision, sorry, and and many interesting results on Thomas will talk about laws versus neural laws and being here.
Well, to be here, I think it's been a couple of years since the last time I spoke. I'm going to be talking about AI and neuroscience, and I know that most people in the audience are computer scientists, so I'll try to do my best. By the way, can you hear me at the back of the room?
It's really hard.
It's really hard. I'll try.
People, it's hard.
I'll try to project. I'll try to project, but
I think everybody has.
This is not working, this one, and maybe this one is working. Ah, c'était là. That trick était là.
okay. Can you hear me now? In the middle of saying that closer, okay. I was in the middle of saying that I'm going to cover topics spanning neuroscience and computer science. My understanding is that most people here are computer scientists, so I'll try to fight to strike a balance between, but so that you can follow along. If anything is unclear, feel free to interrupt, ask questions. We were wondering how much time we have, and we guesstimated based on the fact that the launch is at about 30 days, that we should running a try to and maybe we'll keep all the questions for after our talks. And if people have questions, they can always. I'll be around all afternoon and happy to answer questions. Okay, so the take-home message or the key line from my talk today will be about. I'm going to try to make the case that's moving away from things are getting worse with scale, which is the current kind of driving engine behind much of AI. I'll try to contrast scaling laws, which is once again the kind of general laws that drive AI, is the idea that bigger models trained with more data, more compute, yield systematic improvements in performance on computer vision benchmarks. And I'll try to contrast those scaling laws with what I would refer to as the neural laws, which are the general principles that are guiding learning in vision and the development of the visual system together with constraints on architectural constrained from more intense, the way we train our AI objectives and data diets. I will also try to make the case that we need to rethink the architectures that are driving AI. Those architectures are largely fit-for neural networks. Our brain is a massive feedback machine. And so I think if we want to make real progress towards more efficient, robust AI systems, we need to incorporate aspects of those feedbacks in those otherwise fit-for neural networks. I'm tempted to skip that demo just in the interest of time, but because I'm in Toulouse, I think I cannot skip it. So this is an example of what is my absolute favorite experimental paradigm to study vision. This is called a rapid categorization experimental paradigm. Images are flashed very briefly. At this speed, people are not able to perceive all the details in those images, but they can perceive the gist. So if we ask in the lab human observers to report the presence or absence of an animal, they can do that just fine. They will make mistakes, but what is fascinating about this task is that although people have to answer quickly and processing is constrained to be very fast, guessing mistakes, because if we look at the pattern of correct and incorrect responses across thousands of images and multiple human observers, we find that there is a systematic pattern of errors, meaning that some images are consistently correct. And the key question for visual neuroscience is to capture and model the underlying visual strategy. The reason I said I couldn't skip that demo is because much of the work developing this experimental paradigm and the subsequent studies leveraging this paradigm to study human visions was done here in Serre by. All right, so back many years ago, over 2 decades ago, when I started my PhD thesis, the assumption was that if we're capable of mimicking human accuracy and patterns of correctness on progress, both on the computer vision side as well as on the neuroscience side. So I'll spare you the details in the interest of time, but I studied my PhD thesis 25 years ago in the lab of Tommy Poggio, where together with colleagues, we set the agenda to do precisely that. We built a very detailed computational model. This is a fit-for the hierarchical model, modeled after the anatomy and the physiology of the visual system. To a first approximation, this is very much like a modern kind of deep neural networks. It has about half a dozen or so processing stages. But one key distinction between this model and the modern deep neural networks is that this architecture was never optimized for maximizing performance. All the hidden parameters, all the hyperparameters in these architectures, anywhere from the number of layers to the size of the receptive fields to the number of connections between layers, to all kinds of parameters that went into designing these models, all of those parameters were constrained from available neuroscience data. One footnote that I want to add here is that the training was not done end-to-end with supervised image labels, but rather both because of a lack of compute, lack of training data, and also for biological reasons. Back then, we were limiting to training those hierarchical models in a greedy kind of layer-supervised local learning rules. We would train bottom layers first, and then once these layers were trained, we would train the next one, and so on and so forth. For those of you who are familiar with restricted Boltzmann machines and things of that sort, this is essentially the similar idea right there. To close the loop, this architecture that was meant to summarize what is known about the underlying neuroscience of functions during this rapid animal categorization task. Back then, there was, the data sets were, as I mentioned earlier, much smaller. We had the Caltech 101, about a few thousand images. There's much to boast about the accuracy of these hierarchical models. I think we're roughly at 40, 50% for about, 100, when chance would be about 1%. But we were at least competitive with what was at the time the state of the art, which were much more structured kind of probabilistic models from designed at Caltech by Perona's group. What we are doing, we're not just naive in what we're doing. I just put a few key citations there from Lucan's group back then. Essentially, all the work in computer vision was literally focused on this idea that, vision systems had to be hierarchical, they had to be trained and supervised, produced in computer vision. This was into the backprop with an accuracy on so what enabled the training of AlexNet was two things. One was the availability of GPU, as well as with over 1 million training examples. AlexNet was the first success story where everybody was trying to beat the state of the art. After years, you see that the accuracy of these models keep improving as those models scale up, right? As they get deeper and deeper, potentially, vastly outbeating the depths of our own visual system. Earlier, our visual system was about half a dozen or so visual areas, by 2015-16 of processing. And again, the key, engine here behind this progress was, the move, in part, the move from this local greedy wide learning to this end-to-end training with backprop. Okay. Particular at MIT, the group led by Jim DiCarlo started to run collect neural data related to in various visual areas, and then measuring the alignment between those models and neural area. I'm going to skip very quickly over the methods used to measure alignment. I'll just briefly say that in general, you can imagine that, those neuroscientists are recording from different visual areas. You present images, you measure the corresponding individual images. And then the rule of the game is to pass the same images through a neural network. You extract activations from different layers, and then you train a linear probe from the individual layers of the model. The better is the ability of the model to the greater the alignment. And so people have derived all kinds of scores very similar plots than the ones shown on the screen. Every dot on those plots will be a model. The x-axis will be a measure of performance for image categorization. The y-axis will be a measure of alignment, in this case, neural alignment, but I'll show you examples of behavioral alignment. And so when people started to measure the degree to which those task-optimized engineered system align with our data from our own visual system, you see that, for instance, on this left plot here, the red dots are models that were not constrained by any kind of neuroscience data. And yet, you can see that they are pretty good in terms of classification. They're on the far right, but they're also fairly good in terms of accounting for neural data. Sadly for me, if you look at some of the middle point, like this H-max, that's the model that I introduced earlier. This is a model that I dearly and painstakingly constrained to be more biologically plausible, you see that this model is mediocre all around. It's mediocre at classification, and it's actually not doing that well at accounting for neural data. So that got a lot of people excited, and the assumption was that, we can forget about, as neuroscientists, we can forget about the anatomy and the physiology. We can just crank the engineering knob, design models that are more and more performant. In the process, maybe we'll uncover some general principles of vision, and we'll get a better understanding of our own visual system. That study on the left was carried in 2014. This was kind of at the very beginning of deep neural networks. On the right is like follow-up work from 2018 by the same group that includes your favorite deep convolutional neural networks of the time. And you see that the trend seems to continue. The models get more and more performant. And as they get more and more performant, their alignment with neural data keeps increasing. Okay, so all these studies were carried several years ago. A lot has changed since convolutional neural network and ImageNet. In particular, we're in the era now from millions of image data sets to billion image data sets. We're past convolutional neural networks. Transformers have taken over. We have a variety of training protocols ranging from fully supervised to self-supervised. And by now in computer vision, we have hundreds of methods. And so we wanted to take the temperature and assess how much progress we have actually made in the last few years. And so for this, this is a paper we just published a few months ago. We took a representative set of about 350 modern deep neural networks trained from a variety of image data sets, variety of training protocol. We use the team library from PyTorch for those who know the library. And we systematically evaluated their models for their classification accuracy on a variant of ImageNet called multi-label attribute ImageNet. If you've never heard about it, it's no big deal. Just know that it addresses some of the shortcomings of the initial annotations on ImageNet. And it comes with a human baseline, which I'll show you in just a second. So we just took those 350 models, and the first thing we did was just evaluate their accuracy and compare those accuracy against human observers. And out of 350 models, about 30% are within the confidence interval of human classification accuracy. I should have emphasized the fact that we are now very far from our rapid presentation, animal, non-animal images. This is now 1,000 way classification in unspeeded recognition tasks. So subjects were trained to recognize, and they had no time constraint. 30% match humans, another 1% outperform humans. So this is a completely new era for vision science. We are now at the point where computer vision systems are at the level or at a level superior to humans for visual recognition. Okay, so I'm going to show you very quickly a couple of metrics to actually measure the alignment between these models and human vision. First, I'll start with neural data alignment. These are data collected at Harvard by some collaborators. The details don't really matter. Again, similar plot to what I showed you earlier. Image classification accuracy on the x-axis. Each dot is a model. Spanning CNNs, convolutional transformers, VITs are vision transformers, convolutional versions, full transformers, different training protocols, different data sets. I hope the trend is pretty clear, and I should say neural alignment on the Y. The trend is pretty clear. Actually, if you consider these results from a chronological perspective, when you go from left to right, from less performant to more performant models, you're almost following a chronological timeline. Older CNN on the left, and then the latest and greatest transformers trained on internet scale of data on the far right. So you see your human accuracy here in gray. You see your models that are at human level, and then a few models that are outperforming humans. The trend is very clear. When you look at how much performance has been driving neural alignment, initially we had a weak correlation between the top performing models and their ability to improve the alignment with neuroscience. We are now in a phase where this alignment or the trend is reversing. Yeah. The better models are now less and less well aligned with primate vision. And just because this is neuroscience, the paper just came out, but this is based on models that were from last year. I was just giving a talk at CDPR, and I knew that people were going to ask me about their absolute favorite models. And to be clear, those models are absolutely amazing from a vision, computer vision perspective. If you've heard about models like DynoV3, JEPA, and you pre-train those models on a large amount of data, and the visual representations that you get out of those models literally allow to solve almost, every possible visual task. So from an engineering perspective, those models learn amazing representation. But again, when you check their alignment with human vision, whatever they learn, whatever visual representations they learn, does not align with the ones found in our visual system. A second set of alignment, and I guess I should speed up a bit here, is the metric of behavioral alignment. I'll just mention it quickly because some of you have heard about some of this work. Some of it was done here in the last iteration of ANITI, where we were collecting at scale human psychophysics data to identify what part of an image drive human decisions. So the game is called Click Me. If you haven't played, you can scan that code and then you can try it for yourself. We are collecting additional data. We're trying to scale that to the entire ImageNet. But this gives us a different metric or measure of alignment with what those models are doing. Here we are getting importance maps from humans. We are leveraging toolboxes and methods for attribution to derive attribution maps from deep neural networks that were designed or developed here at ANITI and DEAL. And just to give you an example, so what we get out of this game, so every row here is a sample image. Every column on the left, you have the human column, which is the part of an image that are used by human observers for classifying this image as a snake, bear, etc. On the right side, you get what was at the time representative computer vision systems and their attribution maps indicating what part of the image they care about to classify images. I hope it doesn't take much work to realize that those maps don't look quite the same, but nonetheless, we can take individual images, correlate the human maps and the model maps, average across all the images, and then we get a score, which is what we call the human feature importance alignment. And we get a very similar trend. Again, whichever way you look at those results, initially we are making slight progresses towards getting better models of biological vision. By now, the trend has reversed. I want to highlight in particular the fact that here this is a correlation on the y-axis. Those superhuman models have a negative correlation with humans, suggesting that whatever they do, whatever part of the image they look at, this is literally the complementary part to what humans look at. Okay, so the million-dollar question is essentially to figure out how to get those models to learn and discover more human-like visual strategies. Again, for those of you who have heard me speak before, a former PhD student of mine from ANITI developed a method which we call neural harmonization. This is meant to be mostly a sanity check. We verified that when we co-train models, both for image classification, as well as we force them to leverage or pay attention to pixels or features that are also important for humans, we can do that. Irrespective of the architecture, the method works on CNNs, transformers, you name it. This is to give you an example. The middle column here, harmonized VIT, is literally taking a VIT and co-training it with human data. And you see that we're able to steer the model towards adopting a much more human-like visual strategy. Now, scientifically, it's not very interesting because it's just showing that we know what we are doing. We can optimize those networks and steer them in any direction. To me, what's interesting is the fact that this is successful across architectures, suggesting that fundamentally, in theory, there is nothing preventing those neural networks to discover a human-like visual strategy. Because we can co-train them and force them to discover that strategy. They just don't do it in the way they are trained currently. And I'll make the argument that they don't do it because we train them on static IID images in batches of images, which has nothing to do, obviously, with the way our babies learn. So how do babies learn? Just to give you a sense for the kinds of visual experience that our babies engage in when they learn. This is just a representative sample from old data we collected many years ago with a colleague of mine at Brown, who was a developmental psychologist. We had this setup where we were collecting and automating the data collections from babies, solving all kinds of visual tasks. You see the cross here. This is 14 months old wearing an eye tracker, so we can see where the baby is looking at. And so here, there's no task. We just dumped a big box of toys in front of the baby, potentially toys, objects that the baby has never seen before. And what you see here is the baby just learning about those objects for the first time. And obviously, the baby doesn't have just IID images, but the baby is able to, through head movements, get continuous transformations of inputs, as well as through kind of head rotations, grasping, and manipulation. I should point out that there is, we're not the first one to come up with and work on this idea of leveraging more ecologically valid kind of training data. Lots of previous work in computational neuroscience, major effort at Stanford collecting baby cams. I personally don't like baby cams myself because I think they are biased and under constrained. Instead, here, what I'm going to show you is our attempt to, port what people have done in static image data sets for image classification towards things that look more ecologically valid. So here we used a standard computer vision data set, which is called Code3D. This is literally people were crowdsourced to collect, video data where they move around objects, and they do that with their iPhone. One particularly appealing aspect of this data set is that it comes with, so using modern deep learning methods for computer graphics, it comes with all the tools needed to extract 3D information or recover 3D information from the sequences, which means that we can re-render the sequences and have perfect control over the range of transformations that are imposed on those objects. And so in a way, we can relate the data diet and the properties of the data diet to the properties of the learned representation. So we have a lot of control over what we do. I'll skip this just to say that there's a lot of work in computational neuroscience that has argued that an important signal in the learning of visual representation can be derived from the smoothness of transformation sequences that we experience during learning and development. Here we are taking a computer vision approach where we essentially try to adapt some of the large arrays of methods that have been developed in computer vision for self-supervised learning. And I should say that a lot of those methods have been borrowed from work done in large language models. Just to give you a super high-level view on what those methods look like, the basic idea is in general to mask part of an image or part of an image sequence. And then as an excuse to train the model, the models are trained to essentially learn to recover what's hidden behind patches. And the assumption is that this forces the model to discover, statistical regularities in those images and image sequences. And then in the process, the models discover visual representations with good properties. So there's a variety of strategies one can leverage for masking those images, anywhere from what is called a mask autoencoder on a single frame, which is the top view here. You can also extend that to the temporal domain with a video MAE, where you mask part of the image and you keep that consistent across multiple frames. Or you can kind of move all your mask onto one single frame, right? And so the single frame can be a middle frame, in which case the model is required to learn to interpolate between frame or spatiotemporally, or you can push this mask to the end of the sequence, in which case you are forcing the network to learn autoregressively to predict the future. And that's very reminiscent of what GPT does when it's trained to predict language. All right, yes, 10:30 we started. Okay, I need to hurry up. All right, so here are some initial results. Again, I'm showing you a map that is very similar to, or plot that is similar to what I showed you before. The accuracy here is measured on this Code3D. Chance is at about 1-2%. Each dot is a different network. We first start with the lighter, what we call linear probe, is essentially just taking models that have been pre-trained on ImageNet for image classification. And we just train a linear decoder to try to classify objects on our Code3D. And then we're going to continue training those models with the hope that we can push the alignment towards human observers. So our goal here in general will be less moving towards the right, which is better accuracy, and rather moving upward towards better alignment with humans, which is our y-axis. So the first control we run was to try to fine-tune this model for image classification, right? So there's a lot of work in visual neuroscience suggesting that maybe our visual system is optimized for visual image classification or object recognition. So what you see here, each of those lines correspond to a seed model fine-tuned for image classification on our data set. And so I hope you can appreciate that the models learn, it works, they learn better, or they are more performant, but in general, the alignment with human is not really improving. Instead, when we train, and so there's a range, I hope you can see, and maybe not so much in the back, different colors corresponding to different training objectives. In general, on average, almost any of this further unsupervised training tends to encourage model to be better aligned with human observers. There's a lot of noise in this data. One trend that seems to be clear is that in general, the models trained for next frame prediction tend to be more consistent in their ability to improve alignment with humans. Sometimes, for instance, some of the reconstruction loss yields actual decrease, and there's a lot of noise. In general, we see a very complex interaction between the learning objective and the architecture that we use as a starting point. Just as a parenthesis, we also find that we're not just overfitting on this Code3D, because when we go back to ImageNet and run the same analysis on the subset of categories that overlap between the two, we see the same exact trends out of the box, suggesting that, again, whatever is happening on this Code3D does generalize to another data set. Okay. Now, our assumption here at this point is that maybe there is a complex interaction between the learning objective and the architecture. The problem we're after here is to explain how humans solve the problem of what we call object constancy, our ability to perceive and recognize objects in a way that is invariant to the viewpoint. The assumption that is being held in neuroscience is that that ability for object constancy stems from visual representations that are stable across viewpoints, meaning that whatever features we use under a canonical view of an object, typically human observers will tend to rely on very similar visual representations across viewpoints. In comparison, what I'm showing you here on the right side are importance maps from a representative deep neural network derived at every frame of a transformation sequence from one of those objects. And I hope you can see that this thing is lighting up in every direction, suggesting that the representations learned by deep neural network are not stable over transformations. So we're going to need a metric for measuring the stability of the visual representations beyond just measuring the performance of the models. We can leverage our Gaussian splatting and modern computer graphics methods to do that in very precise and quantitative ways. I'll skip this in the interest of time. You can ask me if you're interested. And voila, we find that the hidden variable here explaining the degree to which those methods improve the alignment with humans can be fully explained by the stability of the learned representations. On the x-axis is the stability score. And I lost the humans are here on the far right, meaning that their representation are very stable. People will tend to rely on the same features across different viewpoints. You can see that for deep neural network, different methods and different architectures will lead to different, as I showed you before, different level of accuracy. However, when we look at their stability here on the x-axis, we find that this is a key predictor of explaining human feature importance. I forgot to put the statistics here, but you can trust me on that. All of those are very significant, suggesting that, again, the hidden variable here is not so much the specific of the learning objective, but their ability to drive individual architectures towards more stable visual representations. Okay. All right. Okay, so we are very excited about this, and certainly we're making progress. Where are we going next? And I think I might have mentioned some of this work in prior visits. For those of you who have heard this work, I've presented a new benchmark that we've introduced, which we call the visual perspective taking. This is a task that is borrowed from it was pioneered by Piaget, which was a Swiss developmental psychologist back in the 50s. The task is a key element of the theory of mind. And here's an example of that task. So you can ask a baby as young, on some version of the task, you can ask a baby as young as 12 months of age. And you can present an image of the sort shown here on the right side, where you can test whether you can ask a baby, and there are experimental methods to do that. You can ask a baby or a human observer whether another viewer in the scene, so this is the them here on the left side, whether that observer can see an object in the scene. So in this case, the brown thing on the right side of the tree is supposed to be a brown bag. As the observer, you can see the brown bag. The question for you is whether you think them can see the brown bag. In this case, the answer is no, because the brown bag is occluded by the tree. And there are different versions of that. This is the version 1, which is called VPT1. There's a second version where people are asked to judge whether another object, like the flower, for instance, appear on the left or the right of the tree for the them observer. What is interesting is that different versions of this task require different amount of computing for people. The first version, people will respond in a fixed amount of time, irrespective of the angular difference between the viewer and the them in the image. The second version that I mentioned, there will be a linear dependency between that angular difference and the time it will take them to respond, suggesting that whatever they do in their heads, it is as if they were placing themselves and rotating themselves, changing the viewpoint in the scene in order to solve the task. Okay, so we design, I won't show you the results, but we build a visual reasoning computer vision benchmark around this task and found that none of the existing foundation models, including our own self-supervised models that align better with humans, including all the frontier models that we tested, the ChatGPT, Claude, you name it, none of them can solve this task. They are at chance. And it's not like those models do not see depth. We have controls where we can show that they see perfectly 3D depths. It is as if whatever 3D visual representations they learn is not sufficient to enable them to manipulate those representations to allow them to dynamically change the viewpoint of the scene. So I think this is an important problem that has been overlooked. And so that's something that we're obviously very keen on solving and discovering principles that will allow models to solve this task. And just to connect with some of the work, I won't do very much justice, but just in one slide very quickly. So our assumption is that there is a need for embodiment. The fact that people's reaction time is dependent on the angular difference between their own viewpoint and the other viewer viewpoint suggests the need for them to embody themselves in the scene. And so our next attempt will be in trying to train vision models that are embodied in some dynamic visual world. I have a student at Brown who has started to do some work in visual simulators. We are starting to get encouraging results suggesting that we can train agents to roam virtual agents and to learn to simulate as a byproduct of just navigating. And as a byproduct of this learning to simulate, they seem to be much better and much more performant at solving this task. I think we are ready to move into robotics. And so that's why I was excited to talk to our roboticists, Olivier, Ludo, and Nicolas, where we're going to try to adapt some of those training protocols on robots. Bastien Lelon, who is a graduate student in the chair here at Toulouse, who is in the back of the room, is going to take this work in the direction of training robots and virtual agents towards grasping. His interest is in leveraging grasping for learning mental rotations, which involve mentally rotating objects in one's head. We have a second graduate student that just started. He's stuck right now in Mexico because of visa issues, but he'll be back soon. He's taking this work in the direction of navigation with the hope that we can learn to solve those visual perspective tasks. All right, so what I've told you so far, I gave you the preview that I'm going to be arguing for two neural laws of vision. I've so far highlighted the need to rethink how we train our deep neural networks beyond static images with more baby-like environments. And obviously, as our goal is to explain and understand neuroscience, we need to move away as neuroscientists from just chasing performance and focusing on principles that will improve the brain alignments. The second point that I want to make very briefly in the little amount of time that I have is to bring up the issue of biological constraint in artificial neural networks. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't matter in biology, and to the risk of offending some of my colleagues who care about spikes, things like spikes are probably just biological details. They just are byproduct of the requirement of the hardware onto which our neural networks run onto. But I also think that there are many principles from neuroscience that have yet to be adapted to modern AI. One of those organization principles that I think is critical is the need for feedback. Our brains are massive feedback machines. When you look at modern AI system, all the way from CNNs to transformers, they are largely feed-forward, bottom-up reasoning machines. This is in contrast with how our brains work, because when we ask human participants to solve more and more complex tasks, they will start leveraging more and more time. And the assumption is that the way people can flexibly adapt computing time out of a very fixed hierarchy of visual layers is by leveraging feedback mechanisms. This is in contrast to modern AI system, where no matter what the task, the networks are kind of stuck going through a fixed hierarchy of processes or layers. And so what has been happening is that as we make the task harder and harder for those models, the key knob that engineers are turning to improve their accuracy is architectural capacity. The networks get wider, deeper, and that's how they get to solve those tasks. So in a sense, there is something about the efficiency, both in terms of energy, sample efficiency, and robustness of our own brain that really, in my opinion, stems from the presence of cortical feedback. There's still a lot here, I think, to be exploited. So without giving you a full lecture on recurrent neural circuits in neuroscience, I'll just briefly say that we started building computational models of recurrent neural circuits some 15 years or so ago. One thing that I forgot to mention is that if you look at this wiring diagram of the visual system, the feed-forward sweep, responsible for our ability to rapidly classify images, is largely driven by a bottom-up feed-forward sweep, and that's what's accounted by current models. However, our visual system includes two types of feedback mechanisms. One that is top-down mechanisms from higher layers of processing towards lower layers of processing, in addition to so-called horizontal connections that run within layers of processing. So for instance, if you think about a CNN where neurons are retinotypically organized through convolution, you have nearby feature detectors on neurons responding to nearby stuff in space. Your visual system, to a first approximation, is organized very similarly. Cortical columns, full replication over position. But unlike CNN, where in order for neurons to communicate between them, for instance, to learn spatial dependencies in images, the only way they can do that is through feed-forward connections, right? So the only way you can integrate over space is by shooting signals upward. In contrast, our visual system can do that through this horizontal connection. Those horizontal connections are local. And so, but because there is time involved, a neuron can communicate with a neighboring neuron, which can communicate with a neighboring neuron, so on and so forth. And so if you allow the visual system enough time, signals can spread over the entire surface of the visual cortex. In fact, when you image the visual cortex, people can witness those waves of activities, presumably reflecting processes that are taking place within layers of processing. Again, very different from the way CNN works. One could argue that transformers, through self-attention, are capable of capturing some of those, within layer dependencies, but they do that in a very kind of brute force manner because every location has to be connected with every location in a transformer, and that's a very well-known bottleneck, which is this quadratic dependency in the size of the inputs. In vision, that means that if you're trying to deal with larger images or longer spatial dependencies, at some point, the self-attention is going to become a bottleneck in terms of computing and training time. Okay, so many years ago, we worked on fairly detailed computational neuroscience model, which I'll spare you the detail of. But the basic idea is that we're going to be trying to learn kernels that learn to connect not neurons feed-forward, but locally. And the computations will happen through time rather than through depth, if that makes sense. I'll skip that. A few years ago, we introduced a task to demonstrate the benefits of these kinds of horizontal connections. The task is called Pathfinder, and I know that some of you have seen this work before. I hope you can see kind of examples of contours. Those contours are made of paddles. And on each of the images, there are always two markers, which I don't know if you can see in the back. There's a positive and a negative set. This is a binary classification task. On the positive sets, so here's an example here of the positive image. The two markers fall on the same contour. I mean, you can think of that as there having a path linking the two contours. On the negative set, the two contours fall on different contours. Our assumption is that because our recurrent neural circuit with horizontal connection can allow the flow of information between neighbors, in general, a single layer of our module or recurrent module should be sufficient to allow the network to solve the task irrespective of the length of the contour. Right? The assumption is that the network might learn a strategy where you start on one marker and then spread activity across the contour. And it's going to take longer and longer the longer the contour. But the assumption is that by the end of the contour, the network can just query whether there is another marker or not. If there's a marker, the answer is yes. If there's no marker, the answer is no. So that strategy is very general. You can train a network like this on a short contour. It will generalize to a longer contour, and it will solve that task with minimal amount of compute. In contrast, if you think about the way a CNN should solve this task, because there is no horizontal connectivity, the only way to capture these long-range dependencies is through template matching and through feed-forward processing. In general, our expectation is that the top neuron should have receptive fields that encompass the entire contour. And so if we make those contours longer and longer, if we create data sets for which the lengths of the contours grow, the minimal depths needed for a feed-forward neural network to solve the task should grow linearly, if that makes sense. So this is published. I'll go very briefly through those results, but we verified that empirically just on a very simple version of this task. For instance, to give you a sense, if we have a path of 6 paddle lengths, almost any architecture, any CNN, ResNet, UNet can solve it. But as soon as you get 14 paddle long contours, you need to go all the way to 150 layers of processing depth. So there's a very substantial growth in the computational demand on feed-forward neural network as you require them to learn longer and longer spatial dependencies. In comparison, a single layer of our recurrent neural circuit can solve every version of the task. Okay, so after we published this work, a group at Google DeepMind wanted to kind of survey all, this was pre-transformer, then the transformers came up or were invented or adapted to vision. And the researchers at Google DeepMind wanted to evaluate representative transformer architecture on a variety of problems. So they considered all kinds of tasks spanning language, time series prediction, image classification, and then they included our Pathfinder in their benchmark. However, there's a little caveat here. So this is not our work. This is work done at DeepMind. The caveat here is that what they call PathX is our actual Pathfinder. And I hope you can appreciate that this is Google DeepMind. With 2 million training examples, they were not able to train a transformer on this very kind of toy, simple visual categorization task. In order to be able to train the transformer on that task, they had to downsample massively our images, so downsample or reduce the resolution from 128 by 128 binary images, which is not very substantial, down to 28 by 28. And that's what was needed to be able to successfully train the transformer. But again, I want to point your attention to the fact that even with that trick, the transformers are very mediocre at the task. It's binary classification. Again, you have a very simple neuroscience-inspired recurrent neural network model that can solve this task perfectly for much larger images. So I still think that there is a massive kind of limitation in the ability of transformers to efficiently learn to solve visual reasoning tasks. Over the years, we've built up on this task. We have extensions of the task where you have 2 dots, but the rule of the game is to say whether the 2 dots fall on the same object or not. We also collected human data on that. Again, I'll just rapidly present this slide. Just look at the human trend on the left. There is an interesting dependency between the distance between the dots and people's reaction time, confirming empirically the fact that this activity, there seems to be the need for a spread of activity because the longer the markers, the longer it takes. So at least consistent with our hypothesis. And again, just to verify, this is consistent with how the model behaves. So I think we have a reasonable model of human behavior. We've also been successful over the years in taking existing feed-forward networks that have been already pre-trained. Usually we start from a state-of-the-art neural network. We slap our recurrent neural circuit of horizontal and top-down connection into this feed-forward model, and then we fine-tune the overall architecture to solve a task. So here's an example of such an architecture trained for panoptic segmentation. So it has to segment every object in the image and assign a class label. We never tell the network how to solve the task. Here you see the network kind of strategy that was discovered, and the strategy appears to be a kind of filling in strategy. In general, you see that the network will kind of plant a seed somewhere around the center of mass of the object, and then it spread activity until it reaches the contour of the object. Again, very different from how you would get a feed-forward neural network to label those images. Now, the caveat with this work is that because of the well-known limitation with RNN and the fact that, so here we compute through time, and the problem with RNN is that that imposes a very significant computational bottleneck. Because in order to train the model, we need to compute every, we need to estimate or get all the activation for every point in time. Those neural networks start shining when you allow them to iterate over hundreds of iterations, which means that during training, it's literally equivalent to training hundreds of feed-forward neural network. So we were never able to scale those architectures beyond just fine-tuning, just slapping them into pre-trained models and then just fine-tuning them. Which is why, the work, in my opinion, hasn't gotten the attention that it should have had from our colleagues in computer vision. But that's the exciting piece here, is that I think things are about to change. So one of the big development right now in computer vision, and more broadly, I think in AI, some of you have heard maybe about state-space models. They are essentially linear approximation of linear dynamical systems. The beauty of those SSMs is that they allow for without getting into too much detail, they allow for the parallelization of this serial bottleneck that arises in RNNs, which means that essentially instead of having to train and compute the activations over potentially hundreds of feed-forward iteration, we can do that in one go, all in parallel. Which means that now that opens up the possibility of training our neuroscience circuit on much larger data sets. And in particular, beyond images, we have, in theory, the ability to train those architectures on very long video sequences and high resolution video sequences. I should point out that the work was done in large part by a brilliant French master student, actually our ENS student, who spent 6 months at Brown. And so just I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just probably end here. This is to show you how much this thing is exciting. So again, this is the Pathfinder with contour lengths of 14. Humans are at about 90% on this task. You can look at all the transformers. They're all at chance on the task. The standard SSM, we didn't invent SSM. We're essentially leveraging the framework of SSM to approximate our horizontal connections. The initial SSM were just vectorizing images. So they were literally converting images into long vectors and then treating that as a sequence of inputs. Those SSMs are kind of shown here in blue. They were doing better than transformers. They are much more efficient, but you see that they are not quite reaching human level. And here is what you get when you combine those SSM with our horizontal recurrent kernel. We're able to outperform humans, and in any case, we're far more efficient, both in terms of the computing required, both at training and test, as well as the number of parameters needed. We have already started to look at improvements of those. So we call those SCSSM, as in spectral convolutional SSMs. We have extensions of our Pathfinder in the spatial temporal domain, and then we put everything else in the DOS. We're still a little bit below human accuracy, but we're doing much better. And then the exciting piece is that we're now able to train those networks on ImageNet, and we're getting and train from scratch, and we're able to get levels of accuracy that compete with transformers. Again, image classification was never the goal. I think the big win will be when we start training on very long, continuous video sequences, which we have only started to look into. So the good news is that Grégoire, who is this brilliant master student, is actually coming back or coming to Toulouse to do his PhD funded by a grant from François Malguir, I think this is called MadLearn, in collaboration with him and Franck Mamede. And the hope is that we'll be able to build on that work and then extend this architecture to multimodality, as well as to develop the explainability methods that will help us understand what these exciting circuits are able to learn. I'll skip the takeaways. I'll just leave the acknowledgements, and then I guess I'll leave the floor to Ludo, and maybe I'll take questions afterwards just to make sure that we don't run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the time for a couple of questions, Nicolas.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the talk. It's wonderful to see the Pathfinder results again, that they're still there, and you're making a lot of progress. I want to go back to the idea about perspective taking, and also about about this. I think it's a very important idea that you have here of invariance under transformations, going back to the old Shepherd results about rotation of mental imagery in the 70s. So one of the key, and I just want to draw an analogy in language, and then maybe ask you one question about the transforms. So we've had this problem, as you know, of stability of predication of properties on objects under different circumstances. It seems that the representation isn't quite right to just capture those basic semantic facts. And I think the continual transformation idea is very important for that, and maybe that training can help us. But for the perspective taking, that seems to be really at a totally different level. And we have the same problem in NLP. So we are worried about conversational grounding. That is when I talk to you, and I recall the old Pathfinder experiments that you talked to us about in 2023. That'll ring a bell to you, and that'll conjure up a whole bunch of memories. And I'm relying on that because I can do that. I can take your perspective. And so what we found is that LLMs are quite good at conversational grounding